Hello everyone and welcome to the IFST Food Risk Management Systems webinar on Artificial Intelligence. My name is Andy Kerridge. I'm a member of the Food Risk Management Systems Working Group and Vice Chair of IFST's Food Safety Special Interest Group. This webinar is the second in a short series exploring the application of new technologies to food systems risk management. Please keep an eye on the IFST's event page for more details of the next webinars. If you would like to catch up on our past webinars, visit www.ifst.org/webinars. Feel free to make comments and ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation where we'll respond to as many of these questions as possible. I will ask the speakers your questions. This webinar is on artificial intelligence. As we move to more digitized systems, these generate lots of data, and we do not have the time or the capability to deal with such larger data sets. AI offers a way to manage all the data, whether it be sensors on factory equipment or CCTV in shops or abattoirs, or horizon scanning news items for unusual patterns of behavior. Our speakers will discuss what is AI, what are its current and potential future applications, and we'll hear of examples from various industry sectors and learn about novel data collection methods. Our speakers today are Jeremy Frey and Nick Watson. Jeremy is Head of Computational Systems Chemistry at the University of Southampton. He is an enthusiastic supporter of interdisciplinary research combining theory, computation and experiments within chemistry and through the eScience programme, growing this to the wider computational and computing community together with industrial research. He is strongly committed to the need for collaborative, inter and multidisciplinary research and is skilled in facilitating communication between diverse disciplines. He is the PI of the new EPSRC Network Plus on Artificial Intelligence and Automated Scientific Discovery, encouraging the collaborations at the cutting edge of AI and chemical sciences. Nick Watson is Associate Professor of Chemical Engineering at the Faculty of Engineering, University of Nottingham. His research is focused on digital manufacturing within the food and drink sector, and his team develops intelligent sensor technologies to tackle some of the biggest challenges around sustainability, food safety, hygiene and productivity. A focus of Nick's research is developing sensor and data analysis methods that work effectively in challenging food production environments and can be integrated with other key industrial digital technologies such as AI, robotics and the industrial Internet of Things. Nick has led projects investigating how sensors and data analytics can be used to reduce the cost and environmental impact of industrial cleaning processes and unit operations such as fermentation and mixing. For more information on their biographies, please look on the IFST's website. So, without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker, Jeremy. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for that introduction. I'm going to talk to you today about what is artificial intelligence and why is it relevant. I've highlighted that the term artificial and intelligence initially are associated with things like programs that would play chess, but we rather look at not as artificial intelligence, but in the network that I look after for AI for scientific discovery. It's augmented intelligence that we think of as quite important, a concept of how the artificial machine intelligence can work with the human intelligence. And this is part of an ongoing issue of joining up the physical and the digital worlds. How can these two work together? In the food system, clearly we have food and we have information about that food. And that information is often carried now digitally, and once it's carried digitally, we have a lot of opportunity to do manipulations on that information, and those feed back into the physical world. So the physical and digital worlds are strongly connected in the world of the use of artificial intelligence. So it really comes out of the idea of data. And from the data that we can collect, well, we have to be able to collect it. So there are all sorts of issues around actually how we collect data and how reliable that data is. But we want to use that to generate some information about our system. From that, we want to get insight on the system, develop knowledge about it from which we can make the so-called data-led decisions. And in many of the cases, we're not just talking about the ability to do something, but proficiency in doing that we want the computational systems to help. So there are lots of aspects here being brought together: data mining to get your data out, statistical analyses, traditional statistical analyses, leading on to data science, recognizing patterns, keeping information in databases, and perhaps looking more to the future, more and more thinking about how computers can actually work like people. At the moment, we're not really going to consider that. So I can highlight, clicking on here, that the bit that of this whole interlocking system of data and decisions and information and knowledge is around the artificial intelligence, and we'll see particularly focusing on a part in my talk on machine learning, but I'll talk about AI in general as well. We can actually say, well, so what exactly do we mean by artificial intelligence? So intelligence, often difficult to describe. In fact, we don't really know how to describe machine intelligence, and why human intelligence different from animal intelligence and so on. We're talking about system to accomplish complex goals, so bring in information, make decisions and act. That's a very general idea, but even more general perhaps than the general artificial intelligence. And the general artificial intelligence is the sort of thing of the novels, a system that can learn and understand, deal with novel input, and work on a whole lot of tasks without knowing in advance what those tasks are. That's not something that we're really anywhere near doing in the current world. What we can do is to deal with what's called more narrow AI, which is a system that can accomplish complex goals, have agents to do that, working with human and artificial intelligence here and agents, but much more narrowly specified to specific problems, trained in specific areas. Some of that is in what is called the traditional good old-fashioned AI, working on expert systems, extracting knowledge from humans and programming that into computers, often set of rules and so on. That's not been where the explosion has been in the recent years. That explosion has been in machine learning, and these are algorithms that learn from training sets of data. They extract patterns and apply those patterns to new decisions that need to be made. And it's in machine learning that a lot of advances have taken place, and we often hear about all the work that DeepMind has done, where the programs can learn how to play a game. What requires this sort of deep learning requires a huge amount of data, and therefore it's very interesting but not always relevant to many of the problems that we have to deal with day to day, but it can be to many. Going on to the next slide, we can have a look more detail about the flavors of AI. So I've already split between the general AI, so that would be like another human intelligence, but as I say, that's mostly still part of stories. Interesting science fiction stories and films. If we take the narrow AI, focusing on training and intelligence in specific areas, specific domains. Underneath that, then we have things like the expert systems. Those were popular in the past and still very important. Reasoning systems, those are systems that can operate on top of these expert systems, if you like, and actually make reasoned decisions based on data coming in. And again, that's an area that is growing, and we'll come back to how that links up maybe with the machine learning later on. And then machine learning itself. So this is programs learning to find patterns, learning to fit data. And this can be further split into the sort of supervised learning. This is most akin to the sort of data analysis, statistical analysis done perhaps in the past, that we have some cases of our system where we know the answers. I may know a series of, for example, food additives that have particular flavors or drugs that have particular effects, and I want to try and understand what next drug to make. So I will train a system of using a lot of information about molecules, on which molecules were active in a particular disease, and hopefully build a model there to enable me to decide whether some other molecule that I have thinking about testing might be useful. Unsupervised learning, though, gives the computer a whole series of data without this information about which is good and which is not so good, and asks the computer to look for the patterns and learn it for itself. The reinforcement learning ties some of these ideas together and has an objective rather than particular answers to data and these objectives. This is a bit more like where humans might learn, and the computer then attempts to satisfy those objectives, and that's the reinforcement. There are other flavors of this as well. If I bring up the animation to the next part here, looking at the sort of system that's typically used with a link back to traditional statistical regression type analysis. If we have some data, typically would split that into a training set where we actually, of all the data that we know the answers, that's what we're going to use to train the model. We'll keep some back, a validation set, that we're going to use to see if the model is any good. And we will build these models. The process by which we build these models is part of the machine learning exercise, and I'll discuss a little bit later the difference between that and traditional statistical analysis. We'll validate it against the set of that we've chosen to hold back, and then we can use that to actually make predictions about our data on objects that we didn't include in our original amount. There are all sorts of issues here of overfitting, how do you test validations and so on, that we won't go into, but it's a very important part of the process. The quality of the data, however, is important. The split into this training and validation is a significant part of the art and craft of doing machine learning. I bring up in the next slide what I think is sort of fundamental but often forgotten as to why do any of these models might work? Why might there be any pattern there? It turns out that areas that I didn't even expect have laws, and Waldo Tobler created some laws of geography, and his first law is everything is related to everything else, but near things are more related than distant things. And I think that sums up the expectations to why any of these machine learning models should work. The question, of course, is what is near and how do we define that? But that's really, in a sense, what we mean. If we can define what we mean by near and compute that, then we can expect to be able to predict properties by analogy with things that we already know, things that are near. That also tells you that when you move to make predictions that are way distant from any data that you might have had, that might be asking for a lot of trouble in machine learning models as in any. We can create a kind of hierarchy of techniques, starting with linear regression, and everybody in this area does recommend that when you start looking at some data, start with something really simple. But linear regression, a well-tried, tested statistical technique, usually we have some idea about what are the controlling factors and what that are influencing whatever we're measuring, and if so, we can then apply linear regression. Other times, as we get slightly more complicated in our response, a little more uncertain, different types of regression, very popular decision trees, looking for clustering as we start to move sometimes to more of the unsupervised learning, different ways of approaching how those algorithms are developed, and there's strong interest in evolutionary approaches, genetic models and so on. Combining some of these things together, the random forest, by looking at an ensemble of models, so any one model might not be good, but a group of related models might give you much better answers. And then moving all the way through to these artificial neural networks, and towards the end, the top things now, if you like, might be these generative adversarial networks, where you actually train a network to develop new solutions, if you like, as well as analyze possibilities that we might present. And taking these slides from a health talk advising the American government, so that's why some of the examples here of screening convolutional networks have shown very good value in helping screening for skin cancer, but predicting toxicology for small molecules, what will happen will a drug be useful. I highlight here the autoencoders. One of the problems is that as these models become more complicated, we actually have to get our data into them. And some of the models like neural networks have particular ways in which they need to use the data. As a result, we've got to somehow encode what we measure from the environment in the real world into a way that can be used by these algorithms, and then decode it at the other end. And there again is an awful lot of craft involved in that. I put the last one here, the general adversarial networks, the GANs. These are really very interesting because used in drug design, they actually generate suggested small molecules rather than just test ones that we might come up with and want to know whether our models predict that they might be active. And that's this idea of generating solutions is, I would say, the state of the art in machine learning. Artificial and augmented intelligence is about machine learning and its aspect of deep learning, but it does involve the knowledge engineering, which involves, as I'll highlight later, ontologies, the semantics, the understanding that allows you to go from the data to information to knowledge to reason, but always remembering the uncertainty, bringing in the statistical inference and, of course, the statistical design. That suggests that one highlights the importance of experiments, which may now be automated to increase the throughput and use of a lot of robotics. Obviously, that's true in industrial processes as well as in a research environment. That generates data. Often you have a wide pool of data, some collected specifically, some collected just from the general corpus of knowledge in the literature or general understanding that's around. So you combine the data from your specific experiments with the data you've mined from the literature, and then that feeds back into the machine learning model. So this is a cyclical process enhancing our knowledge of the system. We go on to the next slide. I will highlight here that machine learning versus statistical modeling. So in some senses, you could be said that all we're doing is fitting a curve. Of course, this curve may lie in very high dimensions because what we're interested in predicting may depend on many, many, many different descriptors or properties. And we're curve fitting machine learning. We're trying to take a function of typically in a rather flexible function if it's machine learning to approximate our data. And typically in the classic curve fitting, we're trying to find some parameters from a mathematical model that already encodes a theory of cause and effect. So we have an idea of what should be driving the process that we're observing, what are the important parameters here, and we already have some idea of what they mean. In that case, they're typically relatively small number of parameters determined, and the classical statistical data science approaches are really useful and efficient at finding the most likely values for those parameters consistent with the data. The machine learning takes a more flexible approach. It uses a very flexible function, often with many more coefficients in here, often therefore needing more data, but there's no pre-built model inside there. There's no pre-built cause and effect. We're hoping the machine will help us discover information through the mining of this data and the fitting of the models. So machine learning can be applied directly to the simple curve fitting, but it's not the best approach. It's not the simplest or fastest. But when we don't know what is our cause and effect, it's extremely useful to have this flexible approach and attempt to learn what the models might be. There's an interesting mixture of these approaches. It's often called physics-based modelling, although I think it should be called science-based modelling, is when you can encode some reality, aspects of reality, some constraints that are physics typically, but could be chemical or other constraints, things that we know must be true, and we ensure that our machine learning models, whilst highly flexible, still must satisfy these physics constraints. And that's a way of moving in this direction of going from large data and completely agnostic about what might be going on and doing complete discovery, but very inefficient and needing large amounts of data, towards using what we already know and hoping to extract useful information out of rather less data. I hope now you're getting a feeling, at least a little bit of a feeling, of what the machine learning side of artificial intelligence actually involves and what it might do. This was an article in Medium magazine. Artificial intelligence do stupid things faster with more energy. There is a certain amount of let's do things with machine learning, artificial intelligence, because it's the thing to do now. And as I indicated earlier, just sometimes some simple regression analyses might actually be better. But nonetheless, when we're looking for insight and understanding, machine learning, the flexibility it offers, the ability to discover, provides the route to insight in some cases that would be hard to find anywhere else. A route to automation as well that would be hard to build in, things like pattern recognition. So best practice, though, for the application of AI, when it is working, well, it is often tied to automation, but then you've got to be careful about this being human friendly. We want integrated platforms. These can be very good, but they do require standards across an industry or society in parts to be able to make best use of the data. It has to be scalable, because that's one of the whole ideas about using AI, is to expand and scale across a whole system. Really critical that we need trust and trustworthiness, and that really is underlined currently by the investigations of explainable AI. Often we build these models, these complex models with deep learning, but it can be very hard to know why they've come to the decisions that they have. That can be a real problem, especially if we don't know about biases and uncertainty in the original data. From where I'm coming from with discovery, but also in terms of practical applications when data is not available, moving towards the smaller data and AI, that is definitely where things need to go. We just don't have the data. Take my background in chemistry, we can't make all the molecules that we could conceive of. It's just not possible. We have only small amounts of data. Along with the trustworthiness side, data privacy and security, making sure we treat data, especially if it involves people, sensibly, but thinking about the anonymous data is one thing, but what a lot of the investigations with machine learning and pattern recognition showed, that it's actually quite possible to de-anonymize data relatively easily. One of the answers to both the explainable trustworthiness, security, privacy is to be open about what's going on. And then openness also leads to a willingness to adapt to and an adaptability of the systems. Of course, a lot of what is sensible here does depend on the society you're in and the values between efficiency, trustworthiness, privacy, and so on. I point out that a lot of this really is driven by the availability of data. Data is becoming more and more readily collected. More data is collected, sometimes for no obvious purpose. The data is then held, and held often we get this concept of data lake, a load of data, and we do often though see data everywhere, but not any drop to use, because this data is not in a usable format. Maybe it's not even digital, but even when it is, you don't know exactly what that data means. The context has been lost and often has to be recreated, or the data becomes useless itself. And I highlight this is really where an area of knowledge engineering, the semantics, is so important. It's really important to have a clear understanding and clear labeling of the data to make it useful, particularly for machines. Human mind is very good at working out what the data must be and what it must mean, though we often can get it wrong. The computers are in no position to do that. So we need to be very clear about what the data is, where it comes from, what it actually means. And this marking up of the data is utterly crucial to be able to feed it into the machine learning models. That also perhaps again shows why the symbolic AI, the good old-fashioned AI, the reasoning systems are so important too. These rule-based systems derive from the ability to actually understand the data, and if you can understand and label the data, you may be able to infer things from the data. So by properly marking up the data, you gain not only the ability to use it in a trusted manner, but you actually can infer something about the knowledge behind that and the consistency of it, so you can gain from both sides of the AI engine. I highlight, though, the ethical issues here, particularly the problems of bias. I can illustrate that in the very high profile ways in which we see when decisions about giving people bail or what sentences to do them or whether to offer the job have often been built on past experience, but the past experience is often highly biased between racial groups, for example. The test samples for face recognition only originally had white subjects in there. You then end up with an algorithm which may be highly effective in certain circumstances, but those circumstances may not have been realized how circumscribed they were. So we need to address the problem of the bias that may be inherent because of the data in which these models have been trained. When you've encoded a set of rules, it may actually be possible to see fairly clearly where that bias may be, although from within the system we often have trouble with that. But when the system has learnt itself, and we aren't explicit about what those rules are, it's even more difficult to understand where bias may come in, and so important to be able to understand what the uncertainties, what the restrictions were on that training envelope, so to have some realistic idea about what the solutions might be doing and where they might be biased. And this is critical for public acceptance of the models, but also for just reliable use of them. All in all, though, we often do have outliers, and then it becomes very important to understand whether those outliers uncover issues with the data, issues with the model, or something new. So in some perspective, the outliers are problems. They might be fraud. They might tell you that you've got a group of people who were outside the original training set and that we need to deal with it. From my area of scientific discoveries, outliers often show you where you need a new model, a new theory. So are really important, but in all respects, outliers give you an indication of something, areas that you need to go and look at in these models that have learnt themselves. So next slide, I highlight again the need to understand the uncertainty in your data, and really importantly, present the uncertainty in the answers. The human mind finds it quite difficult to appreciate uncertainty, the probabilities behind that, and conveying the uncertainty in the various predictions, whether they are due to the randomness of data going in or the restrictions of the models. That's much more difficult to do. We really have to go to great efforts to understand that uncertainty and present it so that appropriate decisions can be made, including an understanding of that uncertainty. So where do we actually stand? What is the value of doing the artificial intelligence? Well, it's much more able to ingest all available data and build more complex models than typically the human mind could build, especially when this goes across disciplines and is wider than a single human being or somebody studying a particular discipline could actually appreciate. So it's good in those interdisciplinary environments in principle. The models, once developed, can be deployed at scale and provide much more processing, many more options, and consider more rapidly than typically could be done without the models. Often the models, if appropriately done, may take a very long time to train, but once trained, can respond very much more rapidly than a human can, so real-time answers. They can be available 24 hours a day, and therefore, with luck, don't tire, and therefore get more accurate response than perhaps the human could be. But again, issues of how reliable those responses are need to be well understood. The deep AI is domain agnostic, but of course, as I've illustrated, it needs quality data, understood data, annotated data, and that is extremely domain dependent. So whilst the AI model itself may be domain independent, deploying it and using it is far from domain independent. In the next slide, I highlight an area we've been working on, and something that's, I think, very important, and Nick will refer to as well, is that AI actually in the laboratory, in the factory, not just making decisions based on data that comes in, but actually controlling equipment, advising as you're going along, presenting data, providing solutions, fixing equipment, and so on. If you've got the data to build a model that helps you observe what is going on in your factory, monitor the data, and when things start to drift away, can suggest where things need to be adapted. Maybe if it's an automated system, can adapt them, but to correct for what's going on. And we do come to the question in the end in my area of whether or not scientific discovery can be automated, and where the creativity of discovery comes from. And it's certainly true compared to the curve fitting models I said before, where the model, the physics, the chemistry, the science behind it is known, and you're just trying to find the parameters and extract useful information from that. It is then true that the machine learning, fitting a very flexible system to it and learning patterns, is moving towards that sort of creative insight. But whether or not that deep creative agency can be given to the computers, that is still a very serious question. But in our experience, it's hard to teach discovery to people. So teaching discovery to computers, I suspect, is going to be even more difficult. But the combination of computers, artificial intelligence and human intelligence is highly likely to make more reliable discovery. So some of you may recognize this. This is the double spiral staircase in the chemistry department in Reading University. And I put this up. It's designed so that students going up from one floor to another, when they're allowed to, do not have to cross the path of the students coming down. The double spiral staircase has these two independent spirals. But as you see, what I want to illustrate here is that these two spirals are very close together and yet completely apart. And there is an element here where we have a whole lot of people working on artificial intelligence, machine learning, developing algorithms doing this for all sorts of interesting engineering problems perhaps. And then we have a scientific community investigating the principles and stuff behind that, the domain experts, maybe not just science, but the domain experts, and they look across and get a clouded view of what machine learning does, and the machine learning experts probably have a rather clouded view about what the domains are. But we really need to get together and work much more closely and make sure that the data that is fed into models is understood and the answers that come back are also understood. This requires very strong interdisciplinary collaboration between the computer scientists and, in your case, the food disciplines. It's really urgent that we deal with this. These two dinosaurs were talking, cross purposes probably, but one of them saying it's time, perhaps time to develop the technology to detect an asteroid. We can foresee many issues. The UN Sustainability Goals highlight many. COVID-19 has highlighted some others. We have a lot of things that we need to deal with, and food is at the heart of many of these. And one of the ways forward is going to be to understand how to use digital technologies, how to use machine learning, how to use augmented intelligence to solve some of these. And I think it's really important that we get together and do something about this. Thank you very much for listening, and I will now hand over to Nick to give you some more details about the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence in the food system.
Hello, my name is Nick Watson from the University of Nottingham, and I'll be giving a presentation titled Will Sensors and AI Revolutionise Food and Drink Manufacturing? So a little bit of background about myself and my research group. So we're interested in digital technologies within food and drink manufacturing. More specifically, we're interested in sensors, and we work a lot of ultrasonic and optical sensors, and really it's about sensors that can work in production environments, so in the factory, in the field. Once we've collected that sensor data, we're very interested in developing models, so using machine learning, a form of AI, looking at areas of multi-sensor data fusion, really using them to address some of the biggest challenges that face the food and drink sector in terms of sustainability, safety and productivity. And the food and drink sector is dominated by a large number of SMEs. So how can we develop digital technologies that are appropriate for them? So looking at some of the challenges around cost of technologies and the expertise required to use them. In the talk today, I'm going to focus on 3 case studies and these are projects that we're working on related to food safety and risk. The first one is clean in place monitoring. We'll look at how you acquire a data set to develop your models. How do you label that data and the explainability of the models? Second one is allergen detection. And within that, we'll talk a bit about model trust and interpretation of results. The third one is poultry inspection. And again, we want to look at how do you use the predictions and what are some of the issues around people and regulations. So I think first it'd be good to give an overview of industrial digital technologies and what do they really mean for the food and drink sector. So in the UK, we have the industrial strategy. And under that, we have lots of different challenges, and one of those is manufacturing made smarter. Within the manufacturing made smarter, there's really been a focus on 5 enabling digital technologies. They are AI, machine learning and analytics, robotics and automation, industrial Internet of Things, so that's your sensors, your data collection, connecting them to the cloud, virtual reality and augmented reality, additive manufacturing. And I've highlighted 2 of these in red, and I'll explain why in a minute. So if we think about the food and drink sector and how they're going to utilise these innovative, emerging digital technologies, what we have to remember is the food sector is defined as high volume, low value products. So very different investment models and time frames. So often when we work with some of the manufacturing companies and we say, what's your long-term vision? They say, well, for us, long-term is 3 weeks. And so it's very different to some of the other sectors that are taking on board these new technologies. Again, I've said it before, but there's many SMEs in the sector. So how can we develop technologies that are appropriate for them? Lots of legacy equipment. So any technologies that get developed really need to have the ability to fit onto existing equipment and add value, add insight to that technology. The other thing about the food and drink sector, which is obvious but really important, is it's highly variable biological materials. So issues such as hygiene, food safety, shelf life, these don't exist in other manufacturing sectors. So we need to take these into account when we're developing technologies. And there's also many manual operations as well in the food sector because they're handling these variable biological materials. So these are the things we have to think about. So I've highlighted two of these industrial digital technologies, and this is the AI, the industrial Internet of Things, because I think these are the ones that are going to have the real big impact. I think there's lots going on in robotics and the other ones, but I think these technologies, they tend to cost less, they can be fitted onto existing assets in existing factories, and they give you information that you didn't have before, so they allow you to make decisions about sustainability and safety in an intelligent and cost-effective way. On this slide, I want to talk a little bit about the sensors and then go on to the machine learning and AI aspects. So any sensor in a production environment must be cost effective and it must work continuously in that challenging environment. So it must be able to clean it. Ideally, you want sensors that are in contact with the products from a food safety point of view. And this is where over the last few years, the cost of the technologies has really come down. And the fact that now most sensors you can collect to the cloud, so you can stream the data continuously, that means you don't need the wires everywhere and you don't need the electronics storing the data on site, which is great. But really, any sensor must produce actionable information. And that's the point to start with. Before looking at what sensor, you need to think of what is the problem. Are you trying to monitor the quality? Are you trying to monitor how much water, how much energy you're using? Are you trying to determine if a process is finished or not, or if there's a problem with a process? Because once you determine what it is you want to do, then you work on the sensor and the modelling side. Lots of sensors available, and these days the most common ones still tend to be optical, and these could be simple imaging, some camera systems used routinely, or it could be a spectroscopic system such as near-infrared, which can give you information on the composition, moisture content in the products. Optical techniques are only ever going to see the surface, so some other techniques which are becoming more used in food or around ultrasonic acoustics, one of our expertise, X-rays commonly used, and dielectric terahertz and the electrical imaging ones. And these are great because they can give you information about internal aspects of your food, so what's going on inside, so foreign body detection, internal structure and texture. The benefits of sensor machine learning is they can generate actionable information, and by using machine learning, you don't need these complex inversion models based on first principles, which is very challenging to develop in production environments. The other advantage of using machine learning is that they can improve as more or better data becomes available. Some of the challenges about combining sensors and machine learning is the model will only be as good as the data. So if you have a bad data set or a data set that isn't representative of your system, you have problems. There's also a challenge around data collection and labeling. This is expensive. So often you see with new technologies, I was reading a report the other day that said AI still hasn't found a good application in food and drink sector yet, where I think actually using it in production environment is a great application. And the reason I think that is because for some of these techniques, you need a lot of data. If you're going to use a technique such as deep learning, you need a lot of data, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands. If you think of a bread factory, that factory could be producing 10,000 loaves of bread an hour. Each one of those is data points. So we can get lots of data in the food production environments. The challenge is often how we label it. So if, for example, we were making a biscuit and we developed some sensor system to determine the quality of the biscuit, and that could be based on shape, colour, number of choc chips, we could take lots of images. So we'd have a huge data set, hundreds of thousands. But what we need to do is go back and label that data set into good biscuits, bad biscuits. And that often could be a manual task. So someone looking at those images, that's going to take a long time. So labeling this data is a challenge, and we need some new methods around that, which I'll talk about. There's other challenges with using machine learning, which is the overfitting, generalization, explainability, interpretability, and trustworthiness. And these are some of the things that need to be tackled. So, and often these challenges aren't on the technology side, they're on the deployment side and how we use these technologies. So I think one of the keys is the humans in the loop. So it's not a misprint, it should be a capital S because it's more than one. People, when they think of smart factories of the future, they think of these fully autonomous, we put some raw materials in and out comes our wonderful food at the end. But these are complex processes and humans always need to be involved. And I think with the AI technologies, it's about using these to augment humans, give them more information, but ultimately let the humans make the decisions. So if we wanted to develop an intelligent, sensor-driven AI solution in a food factory, there's really 4 areas we need expertise. We need to understand the food materials and the food process. So that could be a food scientist, engineer. And usually a food manufacturer, they have this expertise within house because they're making food, they know what they're doing, and these are key. What tends to happen then is they will go and say, okay, we have a problem, we want to deploy a sensor, and you'll find sensor companies tend to just sell sensors. So you can bring the expertise in and they'll work with you. But the fourth bit is you need to have the data science expertise. Some of the larger companies, they might employ data scientists, some of the food companies, and some of the sensor companies might have data scientists working within them. But really, it's making sure you get good understanding and everyone's on the same page across those 4 areas. And when we see that there's problems when people are trying to use these technologies, it's probably because they don't have the right balance of those skills, or the individual of those skills aren't working effectively together. The other important thing is to have champions and engagement in these projects when deploying these new technologies. And that engagement's really got to come from the factory floor to the boardroom. You get lots of problems if people don't think there's value in doing this, or they see risks to maybe their job in doing this, and that can be a really big challenge. And one of the things around that trust is once you start installing sensors, if this was a job that was done by a human before, maybe the human doesn't see it as their responsibility. So if you have a robot cleaning a factory and the robot's got a problem and isn't cleaning up a mess, before the human factory workers might have gone and seen that as part of their job as clean as you go, whereas maybe they don't. That's the robot's job, not their problem anymore. So these are the things we have to look at, but it's all about humans and technologies working together. So this is a short methodology just to go through the process of combining some of these, the sensors and the machine learning. This is for a particular area we're working on, which isn't around safety, but it's around sustainability, resource efficiency. And in green, really, this is where you determine what it is you want your machine learning model using your sensor data to do. So for this particular problem, we were looking at resource efficiency. So we were trying to reduce the amount of energy or water used in a process. So we determined the KPI, water, energy use. Then we go and look at the sensors. We've done this for a number of projects. One was cleaning, but another one was mixing. And we determine what is it that the sensor needs to do. So we then select the most appropriate sensors, and then we look at the most appropriate data collection and labeling techniques. So the orange boxes are all around the sensor side of it, and the blue boxes are the machine learning. And there's different ways of doing machine learning, but normally you design a model, so which model you want to use, some feature engineering, so you've got your data set, but which parts of that are going to use, which parts of your image, your ultrasonic signals do you want to use, train your model, validate, you can adjust your hyperparameters, test the model, then go back to, is it giving you that information? And this is one of the beauties of machine learning and combining machine learning with sensors, is that you ask it the question. You ask the model the question, is this good quality? Yes, no. And you design it to answer that question. Sensors don't answer questions, they just provide data or signals. So that's one of the really good things about combining the two. So the first case study I'll talk about is clean in place monitoring. So for those who don't know, clean in place is a fully automated system to clean the factory equipment, the processing equipment. And just to get an idea of the challenge of cleaning, in dairy industry, about 30% of the energy is spent on cleaning, and in beer production, 35% of the water. So this has a big impact in terms of cost and the environment, and also the time that you spend cleaning as well. And remember, every minute that you're cleaning your processing equipment, you're not making products. So it has a big effect on productivity as well. Clean in place is an automated system, so very similar to your dishwasher at home. You press a button and it has several cycles. So the first one would be you pump some water through to get rid of the heavy fouling. Then you'd have a chemical detergent phase that does majority of the cleaning. And this will be pumping water through a high flow rate, so you get in the turbulent flow, mechanical action, high temperature, help dissolve the materials. After your chemical phase, you then pump water through again to get rid of the chemicals. Then you might have a sterilant phase as well at the end. Challenge with this is like your dishwasher at home. It doesn't know how dirty the equipment is, and it doesn't stop cleaning once it's clean. So if you're washing the pots of your hands in the sink, you can see when you've cleaned that plate and you stop. These machines don't know how to do that. So what we need to do is add sensors and develop models. So every one of those stages, once it's finished its job, we can move on to the next, reduce the time and the resources required for the cleaning process. So we've been working on some projects for several years now, looking at how we can develop sensors and machine learning models to monitor and optimize cleaning processes. So this has been an interdisciplinary project between the University of Nottingham, Loughborough University, Shantou University in China have been involved, as well as numerous industry partners in the UK. And we've been looking to perform trials at lab scale. We've got a pilot scale cleaning rig at Nottingham, and we've also done some tests at full production scale, and you can see an image on the bottom left. What we started with was the understanding that if we look at a food factory, it's either tanks, so these can be storage vessels, mixing vessels, processing vessels, or pipe work, and that could be the pipe to transport the fluid. It could also be heat exchangers, extruders. So for the tanks, we're using optical sensors, so UV sensors that can look at the fouling. And on the pipe work, we're using ultrasonic sensors. And I'm going to talk today about the work that we've done, which is the ultrasonic sensor side of that. And what we're really looking for this, and what we want our sensor and machine learning model to do, is predict when has the fouling been removed from that pipe work. So here we can see some diagrams. So if we look at a pipe on the top left, we can see that the brown-orange colour is the fouling, and the transducers on the bottom. So what happens with an ultrasonic transducer is it sends a mechanical wave, it's a non-destructive, high-frequency, low-amplitude wave that will travel through the pipe wall, and at the interface between the internal surface of the pipe and the fouling, you'll get some reflection. And how that signal is reflected depends on the material properties at the interface. So you get an acoustic impedance and impedance mismatch. So if there's fouling there, you get a different reflection to if there isn't, and if the fouling's thin, which properties are changing, you'll get a different reflected signal. So if we look on the bottom, we can see the typical reflected signal that we get. Now we've got that reflected signal. What we need to do for our machine learning is decide how we're going to take some data features from it, and there's lots of different methods we can do here in terms of physical features, in terms of reflected energy. We can look at wavelet analysis, or we can go down the data-driven approach where we look at the part of the waveform that most correlates with the changes. So the models we developed were supervised binary classification models. So is it dirty or is it clean? And we used, at the lab scale, we used lots of different fouling materials, tomato paste, gravy mold, and different cleaning temperatures. And what we did with our lab scale rig is we had a camera. So we had a piece of stainless steel with a perspex box, so we could see when it was clean or dirty. And this camera is really used to label the data, because we're doing supervised machine learning, so we need that data label. Obviously, the question here is you couldn't use that in a production environment, so I'll go forward to how we've tackled that challenge. This is just a video which will show you one of our cleaning experiments. So as you can see, we've slowed it down a bit, but we've got the tomato in the middle being cleaned. Underneath the tomato is where our ultrasonic sensor is recording those signals. And we've got a camera so we can see when it's dirty and clean. Generally, we used a camera from above so we can get a better image there. So these are some of the results from our classification. So what we can see on the top is the images. And we can see there's the little black circle. This is where the ultrasonic transducer is on the other side of the metal. And we can see the red spot is the fouling, and over time that's removed. So if we go down to our results here, the top line from images, this is really showing us when it's orange, it's showing it's from the image it's dirty, and when it's blue, it's clean. And below we've got 4 different machine learning models we've used, and these are their predictions. So what we can see is for K&N, K-nearest neighbour, random forest, add a boost, their ensemble methods, we can see we get very good prediction accuracy, 99%. But with the SVM, the support vector machine, we don't. So this is predicting it's dirty when it's actually clean. And this is one of the problems with machine learning. It's not worked, but we don't really know why. Because the model, we've trained the models and we just look at the results. We can go back, we can change some features, we can get an understanding. These are black boxes approaches, so we have to be very cautious of that. This slide, actually, what I've tried to do here is usually in academia, you show your best results, but I've tried to show the worst ones so I can highlight some of the challenges. The graph at the bottom is actually a different fouling material. This is gravy, and gravy cleans very differently. But if we look at the results here, we can see many of the models still 98, 98.5, 90. Support vector machine's not great, but actually here, what's happening in these blue areas is that's predicting it's clean, and it's actually still dirty. So that's actually a problem, because that could tell us our equipment is clean, it's safe to use when it isn't. I actually think what's gone on with here is that the gravy cleans via a very different mechanism. It swells and it becomes detached and moves around. And I think actually you get an area underneath where there's probably no gravy, there's a big lump moving around. That's what we're seeing here. But these are some of the challenges. that we have to understand, or some of the limitations, I should say, of the machine learning methods. So a little bit on dataset design. All of them, you can combine your data in different ways. So in the top table, what we've done here is we've taken all the data from all the models, so different temperature, different materials, and we put them together. And what we found is we get very high prediction accuracy, sometimes 100%, but they're usually 99 or above. When we've developed models for just one material, for the tomato, we can see they're a lot worse, around 66%, which isn't good. I mean, determine what is good, it depends on the application, but we want to be around the 98, 99% mark. And really, the one at the bottom hasn't done as well because there's less data, and ultrasonic techniques are very, very temperature dependent. So by combining all the different data sets together, we've got a lot more temperature range, so our models can generalize over that temperature, where it couldn't do it as well for the bottom one. So that's something you need to consider when you're using these models. If we go on to look at that challenge I mentioned earlier about how do we label this data, we can't be going into production sites asking to fit perspex pipes so we can put a camera in there. I mean, if we could, you wouldn't use the ultrasound signal, you would just use a camera. It's a lot cheaper, it's a lot easier. But one of the things we can look at is transfer learning, and this is where we develop a model in one area, we collect some data in another area, and we use the knowledge trained into that model with the new data. And we have to do some changes to the input signals and things like that. So what we've tried to do here is, can we build an intelligent model on our lab system, but then can we collect data from another system and use it to use that model, so therefore we get over this labeling challenges. And this is one of the technology areas I think will be ever growing within production environments, because it allows us to develop models quicker and deploy them quicker and get value from them. This is just going through some of the process we've tried. We don't need to understand all the data here, but we have the source domain. So that's the waveform, data collected from the waveform on the initial models that we've trained. And we've got some different features, so we've used energy here. And we tried two different transfer learning methods, single feature and transfer component analysis. Some additional features in terms of temperature, mean temperature, and the algorithms we use are artificial neural networks or long short-term memory neural networks. Then we have our target domain. So what we've done here is we've trained it on the lab with the perspex, and we've done some other lab experiments in a metal stainless steel pipe where we haven't got the camera image. Well, we managed to get some images at the end just so we can confirm these models, and then we've tested them. And if we look at the results, I appreciate there's lots of data on here. Dataset 1 to 4 with the flat rig, dataset 5 to 8 perspex pipe, dataset 9 to 12 the stainless steel pipe. And what we found is the transfer learning method, the single feature SF, can get 93%, which is similar to what we were finding when we weren't doing the non-transfer learning. So we're very happy with this, and we think this is one of the areas that tackles that challenge of labeling data. So expect to see a lot more about transfer learning domain adaptation. Case study 2, allergen detection. So I've talked in quite a lot of detail about the first case study. In the next two, I'm going to go through a bit faster. So we've had a couple of projects working in this area of looking at detecting allergens in production environments. So we had a RoboClean project funded by the University of Nottingham, and IoT enhanced factory cleaning funded by the Internet of Food Things. And we've been looking to work with a range of industry partners. With this project, one of the interesting things has been actually not just looking at the technology side of it, but what are some of the other issues that need to be tackled? Is there issues around data trust, data ownership? So with both these projects, we've had workshops, we've actually engaged with these, and we've done a lot of questionnaires with the manufacturers. So on the data collection side of it, what we've done is we focused on using low-cost near-infrared spectroscopy, so very small, low-cost system, and we've just looked at white flowers. And what we're trying to do here is, can we develop models that can determine different or identify when there's different allergens in there? So we haven't mixed allergens into these materials, we've just got all these different samples, and can our sensor and our machine learning models tell us which one those are? So the materials we've studied, we've looked at lots of different flowers, some containing gluten, some gluten-free, nuts, and other ones such as breadcrumbs, castor sugar, egg white, egg yolk, sugars. Here's some example spectra recorded from the NIR instrument. You can see they all have similar features, but there is differences there. You can see in terms of the reflective amplitude, but also in some of the actual features happening at different wavelengths. So we know there's a kind of difference in there. So after we've collected the spectra, we want to find a way of looking at it and extract some data points that we can use for a model. So a common approach is principal component analysis. And we've gone through that, and we've plotted the first two principal components for all the different groups of materials. So we've grouped our materials into gluten-containing flours, gluten-free flours, nuts, animal-based, and other powder-based. What we can see is we get fairly good spread. Where we get most of the overlap tends to be between the red and the black, and these are the gluten-free and the gluten-containing flours. And that's not surprising, because as well as the gluten, the other composition in the flours is very similar, if not the same. So we expect to see that, because we know near-infrared is sensitive to that. So our classification models have gone gluten-contained, gluten-free, nuts, animal-based, and others. So on this slide, you can see the different machine learning models we've worked on. So we have a training set, a test set, and what you can see here is we get really good classification accuracy for all the materials. The only slight problem we have is between the gluten-free and the gluten-containing flours. So other than that, we can identify these different materials. As well as the technical side of it, we also held a workshop between the AI-Free Scientific Discovery and IFST networks at the University of Nottingham, looking at some of the opportunities and challenges about using these technologies. So we were looking about data collection, analysis and use, the ethical issues, sensors, cleaning robots. And I think this was really important for us. I mean, one of the key findings we got from this, from a sensor side, we'd always thought the challenge was looking at powdered materials which were adulterated, so had small concentration of allergens, and we saw that as a very, well, it's difficult to measure and monitor, because that adulteration could be anywhere in the powder, it's maybe not dispersed. But actually, when we were chatting to the industry partners there and representatives from Food Standards Agency, the industry partners were saying that the challenge, the thing that worries them the most about allergens isn't the small amount, it's when someone's picked up the wrong bag in the factory or it's used the wrong material. So even just being able to tell that there might have been a problem there would be really useful. We spent a lot of time in this workshop as well as talking about what happens next. How do we take these technologies from the lab into the factory? And we decided the best way to do this would be to look at trials in factories, where they go through all their current methods, taking the sample, send it off to the lab, but we just add the sensor and keep collecting the sensor data. And you probably have to do this for months, if not years, because you don't get that many examples where the food has become adulterated or it's got something in it hasn't. So we need to make sure we're covering, we're going to get enough positives as well as negatives with the sensors. But we think that's the way we get these technologies to be used more in food safety, is have these large-scale trials, and that's some of the things we're starting to do in some of our projects. Poultry inspection. So just this is more of a watch this space, but this is a project we're currently working on with Loughborough University, UCL and Two Sisters Food Group, and this came out of a workshop by the FSA and the STFC about the 21st century abattoir. And in this, really, we're looking at digital technologies for post-mortem inspection. So the meat inspector has to check every bird as it goes along to check that it passes all the tests in terms of welfare. And also for the dead on arrival. So when the birds arrive and they're slaughtered, we need to make sure that they were alive before they were slaughtered. So we're looking at some new technologies in the area. And again, similar to the previous project where we wanted to work closely and understand the challenges of the stakeholders, we're doing that through benefits realisation modelling at Loughborough. So there's been lots of interviews with different stakeholders. And this project has been lots of challenges because we're meant to be on site the last 6 months doing measurements. It hasn't really been possible, but we are getting somewhere. And Two Sisters have been great in providing the samples. So next time you hear me talk, we'll be able to give you a bit more details on this. So finally, this is just a summary of what I've talked about today. And I think really the deployment of industrial digital technologies such as AI is expected and will rise within food and drink manufacturing, because they just deliver benefits in terms of safety, sustainability and productivity. But what we really need is to get the data people, the manufacturers, the organisations that regulate to all work together, and we need some large-scale pilot projects in this area. That's what will really take this, and we need to have positive examples. If you're a company thinking of investing in this technology, especially in terms of safety and risk, it's just, I don't think at the minute it makes sense because you haven't seen it done really well. Yeah, you haven't seen where someone else is doing it and is getting really value out of this. There's lots of companies setting up about digital technologies for data collection, auditing, regulations, but really, on the sensor side, we need more positive examples, and that's what I think one of the big focuses need to be. Again, with any new technology, we can't just get wowed by it. We've got to understand the limitations as well as the benefits. And again, humans in the loop, absolutely key. I don't see in my lifetime food factories where there's no one working there. I think it's really difficult processes, really difficult materials, and it's about using these technologies to augment the humans. So we've been very lucky to have funding from a number of sources, so Innovate UK, PSRC for the Internet Food Things, the STFC, FSA. On the different projects, we've had lots of people working on there from the University of Nottingham, Loughborough, Shantou, industry partners, and you can see them there. And here's a selection of some of the publications we've done in these areas. But if you do want to know more about any of these projects, please just get in touch and we'll be happy to arrange a discussion.
Okay, thank you, Nick and Jeremy, for such interesting and topical presentations. We're going to move now on to today's Q&A session. Just a reminder, you can submit questions, and I've seen one or two come in already using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. We've got obviously a huge amount of data in the presentations. There was a couple of acronyms there, which I've had a look through the guest list, and it's quite clear that we've got a number of people from overseas, so maybe not familiar with some of the acronyms. Can you explain what IDT and SME are, please? I think this is yours, Nick.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that, Andy. So IDT stands for Industrial Digital Technologies, and I think it's worth mentioning with all these new technologies, there is lots of acronyms. So AI, artificial intelligence, ML, but AR, augmented reality, but that's what we mean by that. SME stands for small and medium enterprises. Again, that can be quite confusing because sometimes it stands for subject matter expert or some other things, but within that context, it's the small and medium enterprise within the food sector.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jeremy, back to you. I mean, yeah, it's the same sort of discussion we have with robots, and I just want to remind people listening in that we've got a seminar in about a month's time on robotics in the food industry. But AI and people, I think Nick, you referred to this as well. But do you see this as a threat? We really need to bring people along with us and explain to them what's going on. What's your view, Jeremy?
I think, as with all these things, there is the potential for AI to change a lot of jobs, and its particular difference between other industrial revolutions is it's perhaps different type of jobs that might be considered to be at threat, if we like. But that's why I'm very keen to talk about this as augmented technology and augmented intelligence here. That the idea of the generalized super AI that can answer any questions, well, maybe we'll get there, but it's certainly way off and not something that is we need to worry too much about at the moment. What's very important is to think about the way in which people can work with these artificial intelligence. As you've seen in my talk, in particular, where Nick is talking, you can't just simply apply these things. There's an awful lot of work that goes on. What it probably does allow you to do is to gain insight, do things on a scale that you couldn't do with the numbers of people that we have available, more rapidly respond to situations, and have people doing more of the thinking. But that invention is still decidedly on the human side, but aided by the computers. I think there probably are jobs, just like the sort of clerking jobs that used to be employ thousands of people doing rather boring things, but nonetheless gave them employment. That there are jobs that are currently being done by people that will be able, the combination of robotics and artificial intelligence will mean that those jobs don't need to be done by as many people. But it's very clear in many areas of industry in the UK, at any rate, we don't have the people to do these things. And some of the jobs are not ideal for people and not safe for people to do. Would be better if we could do them in a different way. It does, of course, mean, as ever with these changes, we have to respond to that carefully and thinking about how those will affect the communities and what training we need to provide for people. We think about this at the levels frequently in terms of the university of what training should we be providing to undergraduates. Yep. But actually, I think as importantly, if not more importantly, it's the retraining of people, providing them with the skills, particularly those who have the domain knowledge we need to work with them to how that domain knowledge can be deployed and before it's lost. Very, very important. So there's a retraining exercise across the board going on here that just opens up new opportunities. So I'm hopeful, but also wary that it is very clear that different sectors will have come under stress in their terms of their employment if we don't respond and provide the training. So as people in the university in that training area, we need to respond and provide those courses for that continuing professional development.
Thanks, Jeremy. And Nick, your view on that? I mean, the examples that you gave were clearly using AI to supplement and add to what humans could do there. I mean, optimizing CIP, energy and water utilization. There's doing that manually just really wouldn't even be possible. So AI is bringing another view on that. But what's your view generally in terms of AI and people's jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think going back to what Jeremy was saying, the augmentation. I mean, we as humans, it's a really interesting point of what is intelligence. And Jeremy went through his opinions, but I think it's the ability to make decisions. It's about to use your senses and to use your knowledge and to make decisions and to make better decisions when you acquire more knowledge. What these AI technologies can do, and when we collect more data, is it gives us also almost like more senses. It gives us more information so we can make better decisions. What's it going to mean for jobs? I mean, with a lot of these technologies, it is the repetitive jobs. It is the jobs that need doing lots of times over and over again. So for the sensors, it could be the quality job, them looking at the inspection on the line and doing the quality assessment. Whereas the AI and sensor technology, be able to look at every single one, you would still need someone there. So I think you would still have a quality person. It's just that they would have a lot more tools available to use and be able to make better decisions and not have to rely on random sampling issues like that. I think it is about upskilling. I mean, whenever we go to any workshop, road mapping activity on the digital future, smart factories, everyone always puts the priorities on skills. And that needs to be skills across all levels. There's obviously the jobs we're doing at the university, but there's degree level apprenticeships. There's training people in work. There's been some work where we can use VR, AR to actually, as someone's working, train them at the same time, move them in a better direction. Because we all know people working are extremely busy. And if you've been working in a factory all day, do you have time to go home at the evening and train? So we have to look at that. But I think there has to be a commitment to get to a better place and see how we can do that together. And it might actually mean that we need to even look. I mean, this is going very broad and outside the manufacturing space, but we might need to look at that. Is the future people working 5 days a week? Mm-hmm. What does the future look like? And do we have more leisure time? And is that how we grow the economy? Because we're spending our money on leisure activities. So I think it needs to be considered as a system, not just what we do in factories.
That's an interesting point, because one of the last trips that I took before lockdown was over to Denmark. And I think if you're talking about working 5 days a week, there's a country that probably has one of the shortest working weeks in Europe, but an extremely healthy economy nonetheless. So quite clearly, short working weeks don't mean economic disaster.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of examples in Scandinavia of reducing work hours and same productivity.
Yeah. I mean, the example I'm thinking of is it's mandatory now, for example, to have CCTV in slaughterhouse. Well, nobody in their right mind is going to be watching every minute of every day's production that's going through there. And the use of something like AI to scan through those images and look for inappropriate or unusual behavior. You still need a human to look at it at the end, but looking at something for 15 minutes, I've stood on burger bun production lines, and the buns are going past so fast that after 15 minutes everything looks the same anyway. So you will get better quality, better filtering of the data that then allows an expert to provide their opinion. Okay, we've got another question coming in here. Other future uses. I mean, obviously you cherry picked some examples there which were very relevant, Nick. But I mean, where else do you see it paying paying dividends in the near future, I think, without too much blue skies.
Yeah, so I think we're kind of interested in the manufacturing side, but I think new product development, I think typically it takes a long time to develop products. You've got to do lots of factory trials. Before that, you'll do consumer. You'll go to consumers, ask them what they want, then you'll develop the food. And I think there's quite a lot of examples where these processes can be accelerated using data.
Okay.
So I think that's one area. Sustainability in the environment, I think it's a big one. Looking at data not just within the factory but across the entire supply chain. So authenticity, traceability. There's already examples out there, combining with distributed ledger technologies, things like that. I'm trying to think what else would be. Maybe I'd imagine some will be around health and nutrition as well.
Yeah.
So looking at everything on that.
Anything, I'll come to Jeremy in a minute, anything in terms of laboratory sort of based? I mean, bear in mind, a large part of our industry relies on laboratory testing and so forth. Anything there, do you think?
Do you mean the laboratory testing in terms of food safety or in the development of food?
Well, it could be both, actually. I mean, you're doing routine sampling of incoming products. You're sampling products going out. You might be sampling products in production, etc. And a lot of that, will go outside the business to external laboratories, whether it's meat speciation or whether it's pesticides or etc. Anything there where you can see AI being used?
Potentially. I mean, I think it's very good for looking at anomalies in data sets as well. And it's one of the things talked about a bit was actually we need to look at combining the technologies. So we might be able to, some of the things that are currently done in a lab, we might actually be able to have some of that measurement online. We stream the data back to the lab. So if the experts are there who need to look at it and decide. So I think it's all going to be about that. But it also allows us to just look at these processes in general. These what the way we're taking samples, sending them off to the lab, is that effective? Is there better ways of doing it? And can we maybe do predictive models to determine better ways of testing, whether it's more frequently or less frequently? I think on the development side, I'm sure Jeremy could jump in with some good thoughts.
Over to you, Jeremy.
That's right. I mean, I think one of the things is they're always going to be, the gold standard test that's done individually, and absolutely, although the developments of fundamental science there help that. What I think can happen is that as we have sensors that can collect more data that is not necessarily so specific, so on its own doesn't give you an answer, but having looking across the board, you can detect the anomalies, you can track things faster. Everybody's interest is if there is an issue somewhere in the whole food network, can you find the origin of the problem really quickly? Everybody opens up at that point. So there's a long association here with sharing data under appropriate circumstances, but then with all this massive data, you're looking for something strange, a pattern in there, and machine learning techniques are extremely good for that. So developing sensor techniques or observations or data that could be from the consumer, from the manufacturers and so on, and being able to watch that to alert you when you then ought to do your gold standard tests. I don't think it's good, when you want to know how much of something is somewhere and is it and where is it exactly, that's going to be back to the lab and people look carefully and think about it very carefully. But when they should do that and making sure they're doing it where they need to and not wasting their time when there's not really a problem, but really quickly getting to the origin of a problem, that I think has a lot to offer. And again, it's a combination of the data, the automation, the sharing, and then having collected that together, the machine learning models work. But I'd stress what I picked up. We've got to know what the data means. So, you collect things, you need to know its provenance and understand it and that's where the domain knowledge comes in so that you feed the right things into your model. Otherwise, we get into the same problem of we can look at cats as long as you don't put a dog there, or you have the same problem of bias in the system. Which we've seen terrible problems with ethnic groups and so on. We do not want to be going down that line because we failed to treat, for the models to fail to learn some particular food group because it wasn't in some particular diet. This is a real danger and would lose public trust in the system very quickly.
Okay, I think we'll draw this to a close now. So thank you so much to both of you for the presentation. If we didn't manage to answer your questions, please contact the speaker directly. Details should be coming onto screen shortly. And we'd like to remind all of you who are not familiar with the IFST that you can find useful resources on our website, including our COVID-19 Knowledge Hub and online food science and technology magazine. We welcome new members, so please check our membership benefits page on the IFST website. So thanks again, Nick and Jeremy, and everyone for attending today. Thank you and goodbye.
Thanks, Andy.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
Look forward to hearing from everybody.